the oxygen. I'm the nitrogen. Yeah, solubility is the plus charge. It has a higher plus charge concentration. All right. I love my job. This is fun. It's good. All right. So at that point, it kind of gives you an idea. Write the following equation for ethylamine when it reacts with each of the following. Okay, great. That's wonderful. Basically, I'm going to draw an ethylamine, and I'm going to pick up a hydrogen, and it's going to be a NH3 plus, right? And an OH minus is going to be an NH3 plus and a Cl minus. That I think everybody can do. And interestingly enough, I think if you look at your problems in the back of the book, that's a pretty significant problem, isn't it? I'm just assuming that it has this problem in the back of the book. And okay, and I do know, I'll be honest, from looking at the test bank, they have test bank problems. I'm not quite sure, but it is great to know that this is a base, and it picks up the acid, and it forms this, which is kind of cool. That actually has a little bit more of an implication, probably in salting your food or something, you know, to change the taste. But oh well. Or okay, ammonium salt is an organic compound composed of the ammonium cation and the anion. There you go. So I have meats have a lot of proteins, you know, and the proteins have nitrogen. So sometimes we squeeze a little bit of lemon on our fish. Why? Because the amine in the fish will pick up the citric acid from the lemon, and it makes a wonderfully awesome taste to quench that. And also, it removes some of the sour, but not all of it, so you get kind of the salty sweet. You know, salty sweet is a thing. It's an awesome thing. It's a little bit of salt with your sweetness. That's why I eat salty pretzels with my Coke. That's salt and sweet kind of thing. It's really kind of cool. So, all right. And we're talking again, if we look at these, yes, we can pick it up. And when we may be water insoluble because this has so many non-polar groups on it, right? But if we pick up and become a plus charge, now we're more water soluble. This is like, I would say go home and look at your shampoo. Inside your shampoo, did I already tell you this? TEA lauryl sulfate, that's what they've done. The TEA is triethyl ammonium. So this is tripropyl, or tributyl ammonium. So, but the triethyl ammonium and then the lauryl is a 12 carbon sulfate. They add the extra sulfate to make it even more water soluble because they want it to be fatty enough to take the dirt out of your hair, but yet water soluble enough in your hair to go down the drain and torture the little bacteria that live in the. It's kind of a double win. You can send that soap down there and it will solubilize the non-polar bacteria that's at the sewer plant. You know, helps kill the bacteria. It's kind of fun. Other amine salts, solids at room temperature. Well, this is not solid, but this is ephedra. I was about to call it speed, but I have the OH here, so this is ephedra. If we were giving this as a medication, we definitely would turn it into the chloride salt so that it would go inside the body and be able to go through the blood system, which is aqueous. This is a diphenhydramine, Benadryl. Benadryl is an antihistamine, stops you from itching and stuff. It's pretty loosely made, so it goes in and binds quite interestingly. Benadryl also, besides binding as an antihistamine, will bind into a receptor that causes sleep. Not everybody has that. How many of you, when you take Benadryl, go to sleep? And how many when you take Benadryl don't go to sleep? Benadryl doesn't make me sleep. But also, Benadryl does not make me anti-itch or anti-sneeze or anti-anything. Benadryl is just useless for me. But I have children that really go to sleep on Benadryl.
It depends on how bad the allergic reaction is.
Well, and they don't have any, so it's good. I'm not saying that occasionally when my child was sick and they just couldn't sleep, that vinegar was not my best friend. Because they need to sleep. So all sorts of different things in medicinal chemistry. Amine salts are made by a variety of different formulas, but what we pull on it, so in other words, this is a plus charge, it needs to have the corresponding negative charge with it. We used to do, I mean, these are true drugs right here. This is how we give them, is as the hydrochloride salt. But we realized that, you know, there are ways to get it inside the body better. When we go down the road here in a little weeks, we're going to see some alpha ketoglutarate. We're going to see some citrates. We're going to see some compounds that your body makes, and because your body makes it, it has a pathway to enter it. You know, if you eat it. And so we've thought about that and said, wait, why don't we, instead of just using hydrochloride salts for these things in medication, why don't we use a glutamate? Why don't we use a citrate? Why don't we use a succinate? Why don't we use these negative charges that are already in your body, because we know your body will metabolize it and your body has a way to absorb it. This isn't necessarily absorbed very well, the hydrochloride salt, because it's so polar. So we're now not using so much sulfate salts and hydrochloride salts, but we're using citrate salts and succinate salts, just to get the drug inside the body and then help it be absorbed a little bit better, because we know that the body has avenues to absorb foodstuffs. So we're binding them to foodstuffs. All right, so again, just a variety of why amine salts are important. Histamine for allergic reactions, serotonin, which is really it's a neurotransmitter in the brain, but it scares me. You will hear SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSUI. Here's the thing about serotonin medications, and they all have this kind of structure to them. We have a ton of uncharacterized serotonin uptake inhibitors. So, if you go to a psychiatrist and prescribe a drug, chances are is that will only have some use for a while, then they'll have to prescribe a different drug, so on and so forth. The thing that scares me is, what in the heck do all these other serotonin uptake inhibitors do? And so gauge if you have to go and you require antidepressants or something like that, gauge how you feel each and every day under that. Because if you start to change a little bit, then it may be better to do something different. And I will say that at some point in time, we already know. You remember a couple years ago when the Count My Vote movement wanted to legalize marijuana. And how did they do that? And I'm not saying yay or nay, I'm going to surprise you on both sides. Because you're going to say, oh my gosh, clean cut kid. And they paraded the young people that had epilepsy, convulsions, right? Okay. Bullcrap on that. We've had that drug out for 20 years. That was total BS. Why didn't we go in and say, let's look at the efficacy of Prozac, which is not that great of antidepressant. The THC in marijuana is 100 times more effective at an antidepressant. Anybody that's ever smoked marijuana when they were depressed will giggle immensely immediately. It's just, that's just how it is. Thank you, She's like, oh yeah, as is. And so that's what I wish people would do. I just wish people had an honesty in what they're doing. Yes, there is some value in THC as a medication. So let's study it and let's make derivatives of it and make it a lot better. Now, that said, we had not ought to be vaping it. We're discovering I could have told you right off the bat. I mean, immediately on being a medicinal chemist, I said, you got a problem with Tylenol. Tylenol is such a good painkiller, it doesn't do the stomach very well, but they're going to put it in your cough medicines, they're going to put it in your opiate-derived painkillers, they're going to put it in every little thing, and it's going to end up causing liver damage. Now we're saying, oh, you can't have so much. Vaping was obvious. You got fatty things going into a fatty soluble lung. It cannot hurt your lung. Smoking will hurt your lungs. Smoking weed will hurt your lungs even more. I have a child that grows weed in Oregon, and he does very well. And he keeps having this mantra as he coughs. No, I know I read that smoking weed is better than smoking cigarettes. Stop. Cigarettes are more addictive than weed because of the nicotine. But smoking weed, let me think, are you just inhaling and going out and going, oh, this is a great thing? No, you're like, I'm going to hold it in as long as possible. Back. All right? So I just hold it in there so that everything will absorb into my tissues. And I don't even know what the hell is in there. It's just that I know THC is in there, but there's all sorts of other plant components in there that we don't know what the crap's going to go on. But I'm going to hold it in as long as possible so it'll expand in my lungs, and I'll catch a hell of a buzz. And I think I'll blow it through a little bit of water, and that'll mellow it down through my bong. Well, the bong is going to take out salts, soluble things like water. It'll cool it down. But again, there needs to be studies there. And I wouldn't be smoking anything, so you need to buy them in edible form. Oh, but it's a different buzz. I can't help that. Anyway, moving along, all the wonderful medications come from nitrogen. Oh, look, this is going to be Oh, gee, Professor Red, no, these are in your book. So this is sold illegally as the amine salt. So this is cocaine, okay? This is the free-base cocaine. It's not a salt. The regular cocaine is a white or a yellow. It depends on where it comes from. Peruvian flake from Peru, Colombia, Bogota, so on and so forth. Crack, if we make it into the salt. So there are all those different forms. So again, the whole point of all this is medicines we end up taking and making these amine salts. If you have a cocaine hydrochloride and you sniff it, those of you that are giggled at the marijuana thing probably have done cocaine in their life too, it's going to burn your nose a little bit. And if in those days you had a real long, extended thing with cocaine, like many of my band members did, one part of their septum rotted through. So they can stick something up throughout all of their nose and it just, Trina, I love you. It's just like, yeah, that's true.
Yep.
And it is. It's a fact of life. So the other thing about snorting compounds that you ought to know, because we're still just talking about me, is that they're made. The people in Peru and Bogota are not like the people in Carlsbad. If you've been past Carlsbad and the little strawberry farms, they have an outhouse and the wash station, right? They don't do that in Peru and Bolivia and Bogota. They wipe their booties with the coca leaves.
Ah.
It numbs their hemorrhoids, and it gets rid of the fecal matter. And where do you think they put that? Back in the batch, because they get it sold by the pound. There was a study done. If you've ever snorted a clandestine drug, be it speed, methamphetamine, or whatever, chances are you need to check for hepatitis C. Okay? 100% of the people during the late 80s, early 90s that came out with the big hepatitis C problem had snorted a clandestine drug. Because people in West, did I tell you about West Valley City yet? Did you see that there was another apartment fire?
Yeah.
There always is one there.
That's because
I used to
people
live
in
there.
West Valley City make Utah's, they're the crack, not the crack, but they're the methamphetamine capital of the world. And ethers are heavier than air. So they make it in their bathtubs. Hello, they wash their booty in their bathtubs too. So again, that's going to give you hepatitis C. But the ether that they use as a solvent comes up and over the tub and hits the floor. You can't smell it because it's heavier than air. And it crawls its way, because it's very volatile. Remember, ethers were like a gas at room temperature? So it crawls its way into that little closet there where there's a pilot light on the water. And then that pilot light ignites and it backflashes into the tub, which is chock full of ether, and begins to burn the ceiling and the walls. And then, because it's usually right next to the bathroom of the next apartment, the 2 rooms of the apartment are on fire, and that's just part of clandestine laboratories. So, if you're an addict, Get it from a pharmacist. Don't get it from a vendor on the street. There you go. All right. Amine salts. How are we with amine? Ammonium. I'm basically just looking at all these different amine salts. Any questions on amine salts? If I have 4 R groups, it's a quaternary ammonium salt. I think I did overkill, didn't I? Yeah. That's all we've done today, is talk about amine salts. But lots of fun salts. Disinfectant. Over and over and over again. Oh, why don't we end with morphine and heroin? Give me one. Yeah. So, if I have an amine, you can see all these are going to be ammoniums. They call these amine salts, but as soon as we take the extra added group onto it, so an amine is just the NH2 without the charge. The ammonium is that thing with the charge. So the title amine salts is a little bit misleading because when you make an amine salt, it is an ammonium. Okay? So you would have a tertiary ammonium salt or a quaternary ammonium salt, so on and so forth. Now, alkaloids, I know why we're doing opiates. Alkaloids, that is a thing in this chapter, which is kind of fun because it brings some nursing in here. So alkaloids are physiologically active nitrogen-containing compounds that are produced by plants. Marijuana would be an alkaloid. Opiates are an alkaloid. Now, here's a little bit of musical history. They are used as stimulants, anesthetics, and antidepressants, and they're often habit-forming. Yeah, seriously? Do you see this little poppy plant and see what it's being scraped off? Those of you that, I don't know, the Rolling Stones had a song called Brown Sugar. There are a lot of songs called Brown Sugar, or, I'm going to give you some of that brown sugar, baby. That is not talking about lovemaking with a wonderfully tan person. Brown sugar is exactly heroin and opiates. That's what they're lamenting in those songs. I gotta go downtown, find me some brown sugar, baby. You thought it was something different. But no, that's what it's talking about. So, your book does want you to understand the definition of an alkaloid. It's a physiologically active nitrogen-containing compound that is produced by plants. And so this is the best example that I can see. It helps you understand. And again, this is not any old leftover rock and roll desire to talk about drugs. This is medicinal chemistry. Look at what happens. Now, you're my EMT, right? So Narcan, the structure of Narcan is going to be just this, right here. Because it will go in and bind. Every one of these, look at their structures. When I talk about structure confers reactivity, this is codeine, your cough syrup. Don't abuse your, now you guys are going to go, don't give me a couple bottles of cough syrup. Actually, this is codeine, the painkiller, not dextromethorphan, which is the other form of it. But heroin, morphine. Heroin makes this less soluble, okay, so that it can cross the membranes. And then inside the blood, you have esterases that cleave it, so that now it turns into morphine and becomes a better, more soluble in the blood to go throughout the system. We take advantage of that type of thing in making what we would call a prodrug. Okay? Heroin is a prodrug for morphine. It is an alkaloid, though. It is a physiologically thing that comes from plants. Back in the 1800s, that's the only medicine you had. It was called laudanum. You put it with alcohol. Think about that for a minute. I mean, that's just, and then they say, well, the average mortality was only 40-something years old. No kidding. Because what happens with opiates is that you bind to the receptors in your brain, and so your brain makes more receptors. So it takes more and more to get the same buzz if you're chasing the buzz. But what it also does is it depresses your breathing. Okay? Now, while you need to take more to get the same level of buzz, that more depresses your breathing more. And so the input of opiate addiction is for you to just keep going more and more and more until you have depression breathing to the point that you fall asleep and you die. The other thing is, if you've ever been an opiate addict and you go back to it, stop it, start little again. In other words, once you've built so much receptors open, you think that, man, I gotta have a whole gram before I'm gonna catch that same bug. But the reality is, if you've gone off it for a while, those receptors leave and you're back to 1/10 of a gram to get that bug. But you go back and just shoot up what you remember and you overdose. When you look at overdosing in opiate addicts, a lot of times that's done through the care of a physician and I can't remember the name of it, Suboxone or some other kind of compound, because they were off it for a while and they had a moment where they felt bad and they went back on it and they overdosed because their body had removed those receptors. But, so alkaloids have a medical place, but its medical place is not the rave, it's not the glow stick dance, it's not the bar, it's not in your home, it's in the doctor's office, under the direct supervision of a competent healthcare provider. Plants, alkaloids. So there's a lot of them. Atropine, solanine, this is kind of an interesting thing. There's some really, we have some wild plants that have really got dangerous alkaloids in them. I won't tell you what they're at, but because I don't really know all of you that well. But anyway, there's a variety of different compounds. You're not supposed to know all of them, but you are supposed to know that a alkaloid is derived from a plant and it has some medical application. Okay? I just like to give you lots. Atropine here, interestingly enough, atropine is something that as a EMT, if you have bradycardia, that means a low heart rate, you would give a little bit of atropine. Oh no, let's go tachycardia. Let's say you have a high heart rate and you give a little bit of atropine, it lowers it to the right level, but if you give too much atropine, it goes from the parasympathetic to another thing and it jacks it way up. So the dosaging can have opposite effects. And that's something that is, you know, structure confers your activity, understanding the pathophysiology of things. Oh, that's going to be a fun class for you. But atropine acts on the central nervous system as well as the parasympathetic nervous system. And you don't need to know that, it's just one of the alkaloids. We're just giving you lots of cool alkaloids. Note the relationship between atropine and cocaine. Hence, you can see that they're going to have a similar, you know, heart rate, slowing of the heart rate, so on and so forth. When potatoes are exposed to sunlight or stored under very cold or very warm conditions, the production of solanine is increased. Okay, so don't eat old potatoes. That would be my thought there. That's a scary thought. I didn't know that. So,
More like don't throw
they're probably
potatoes
created in
the
the
snow.
peel though. Most of your things are in the peel. And there's your laudanum. These are just fun things for you. So, alkaloids, toxicology is the science of going to poisons. That's great. Oh, these are just things. None of this is testing, but I think you just ought to be introduced to a variety. Forensic toxicology deals with the effects of toxic agents as they